For those of you joining us, we left off with the ship that had been blown up. Frank managed to get Judy off the ship, and he got himself out in the water, was swimming back to the island, back to the original prison camp. He was recaptured. They loaded him on a truck. They were loading a lot of these men onto trucks. Judy, he did not know where she was. He was frantic, but there was nothing he could do about it. But he did begin hearing stories about a dog who was pushing pieces of debris, floating debris over to men who were floundering in the water so they could grab onto something. Doing, at one point, getting behind people and nudging them in the water. This dog had worked tirelessly, apparently, at keeping men afloat, bringing them anything that was float that would hold their weight that they could use to kick and get into the shore. And the dog herself was, after supposedly hours of helping other men, began to sink herself from exhaustion. And some of the survivors were able to get to her and pull her to shore before she drowned. Unfortunately, she was discovered by the Japanese. They tried to hide her, but they couldn't, and she was discovered. And remember, before she was smuggled onto the ship that was blown up, there had been a new commander at that camp named Nishi, and he hated dogs. Well, guess who was standing out just as she was brought out of the water? Well, she was brought out of the water. A gentleman named Les Searles was one of the sailors. He was trying to smuggle her onto the truck that he was being put into when Nishi discovered her, and ordered some of the guards to get their guns and shoot her. Now, for all you karma folks, this is where you're going to be glad to hear the story. After all she'd done to save all the lives she saved, and now this man, this Captain Nishi, was going to pay her back with a bullet, he thought. Just as the Japanese soldiers recovered their rifles, came back to the scene to shoot the dog, another voice boomed out, telling them to drop their arms. And this voice belonged to Commander Bano. Remember the original commander of the camp, the one who had registered Judy as a POW, the one who wanted one of her puppies? He hadn't left the island yet, so he was still there, and he overrode Nishi's orders and told the Japanese soldiers that were going to shoot Judy to pick her up and put her in the truck, where she was brought to the new camp that was being set up, reunited with Frank Williams. And then they waited for the next leg of their journey, their torture. The Japanese had decided they wanted to run a railroad track across this island, right through some of the thickest, densest, deadliest jungle in the tropics. And of course, they had free labor. All they had to do was get these men out and start working them, and that became their daily chore from sunup to sundown, clearing the most deadly jungle, or some of the most deadly jungle to be found. Judy, Frank said, had changed. She was no longer the happy dog she had been. She was now very streetwise, very jungle-wise. She did not like the Japanese guards. She did not care for any of the soldiers, and they returned the feeling, but unfortunately they returned it with lead. They were trying to shoot her and do away with her. Frank, this amazing relationship the two of them had, somehow was able to teach her to go and stay in a certain part of the jungle, a distance from this camp that they were in. Remember, it wasn't a prison camp with walls. Didn't have to be. It was the thickest jungle. You couldn't see at night your hand in front of your face. So they were relatively free to walk around. It's just they couldn't walk very far, very fast. And Frank moved Judy to a section of the jungle and trained her to stay over there at sunup. And then at night, if it was clear, he would, they said, whisper her name, and she would hear it and come in. Now, because she was out in the jungle during the day, and she became a really wise jungle creature, she would bark and alert the camp if there were leopards prowling at night. If there were any predators coming towards the camp of the sleeping men, she would bark and wake them up. In the daytime, she was free to forage for her own food. They said at night, many nights, she would come into the camp when Frank called her, and she'd be bringing a monkey or a snake or something edible. Her food that she would share with Frank or other men. So, one night she even brought in an elephant shin bone. And I guess being frugal and thinking of the future, she knew there could always come a snowstorm in Malaysia, and you needed something for a rainy day. So she spent almost the entire night digging a hole large enough to bury the elephant shin bone. Probably there to this day, I don't know. But that's how she lived day to day. Once in a while, she'd be spotted. When she was spotted, they'd shoot at her. At one point, she actually was grazed by a bullet, one of the guards. But the Frank and Searles, the other prisoners, started noticing this, or hearing the sound of airplanes, a lot more airplanes flying over the island. Then, as they were working, they would see things come crashing through the jungle canopy, and there were packages of food, and it was the RAF. They had taken over this part of the Pacific, the South China Sea, wherever these guys were, and they were going through the, flying over, dropping packages of food, things for the men. The Japanese were clearing out. They were defeated. They didn't get the railroad built, and they were leaving town. So, and this was in 1946, I believe. 1945, I'm sorry. The RAF came in. They freed all these people, put them on a plane, on a ship. They had to smuggle Judy onto the ship because there was a strict rule against any animals on board the ship. They kept her on board the ship, I think, hidden for 4 or 5 days. It was a 3-week journey. I think they're heading to Liverpool, if I remember right. After the 3rd or 4th day, they were so far out in the ocean that they wouldn't turn around and go back, so they let everybody know that she was here. And Frank said she picked up just like she had done when she was the mascot on the very first ship. She would go from section to section of the ship, meet people, and there was a cook in the ship who was real fond of her. And she spent a lot of time there with him, testing the food before the men had it at the mess hall. Landed back in England, and Judy was recognized for everything she had done to help save the lives of these men. Frank Williams had said at one point, trying to remember something about, there were days that all he wanted to do was kill himself. The depression, the hunger, the starvation. But when he got thoroughly depressed, he would only always look in Judy's eyes. And when he looked in her eyes, he knew that if he died, it would be the end of her. And it was that thought that kept him alive through those years of hell. That dog's presence and what she did for them kept him, and hundreds of other men would tell you the same thing. She touched the lives of so many of these prisoners and gave them just enough hope to make sure they got back to their families and their lives. And she was awarded the Dickens Medal, which is like the Doggy Medal of Honor that the Brits give. She was seen all over the country. She went on tours with Frank Williams. At some point, in 1946, on the 1-year anniversary of the victory over Japan, the BBC had a big program, and it's a big anniversary celebration, BBC Radio, and they opened the program with Judy barking around the world. So first time the world had heard her voice. There have been books written, countless books written about her. Her and Frank, they were in Liverpool for about a year, and then he got a job. You'll like this part. He got a job doing some sort of research in Africa. Yep. And what do you know? Here's Frank and Judy back in the jungle. Only this time, Judy was on top of the world. They say she had the time of her life chasing baboons and chimpanzees. They lived in Africa for 2 years. She caught a cancer, and then they operated on that, but then an infection set in, and she had to be put down, of course. She had to be euthanized, but not until she touched the lives of so many people, even in the civilian world, with her story of courage. She was buried. They had a little monument made to her with a plaque telling her life story. And I think she's an example of what we can do for dogs and what dogs do for us that not enough people know about. I would love to see more of her story revived. And we're gonna let you guys look up Judy, the prisoner of war dog, and see what you can learn about her. It's really a lot more things than I've had time to tell you. I will say this: when we talk about dogs and being emotions, do dogs love us? Are they just stimulus response? That's what a lot of the scientists, not all of them, will tell you. Think about this. This dog was in that jungle. She could have gone anywhere. There were villages on this island. She could have gone to one of the villages and scavenged for food like a lot of the dogs did. But she stayed in this jungle, and not only did she stay with Frank Williams, during the day, if she found food, she brought that food back to share with Frank and these other prisoners. So, can dogs think? Can they reason? Can they love? Get back with us tomorrow on the same channel. We're going to do our podcast, Guard Dogs and Good Dogs, and we're going to talk about just that very thing, the emotions of dogs. And does your dog really love you? Check in with us tomorrow at 6 o'clock and you can find out. Thanks.